Değerli katılımcılar,
Distinguished participants, distinguished audience,
Türkiye Rüzgar Enerjisi Birliği tarafından düzenlenen
as Turkish Wind Energy Association is organizing this webinar on the Turkish wind business outlook, lessons learned from local and global markets and business model benchmarks. I would like to invite you all to our panel. Before I start my words,
şahsım,
I would like to express my gratitude on my behalf, on behalf of our ministry and on behalf of all the panelists. And I hope that this panel will be very useful for our industry. I, at the same time, would like to express my appreciation to all contributed to the organization of this panel. You know, we have very distinguished panelists that will be contributing to important aspects of the industry. And to the extent possible, we also will try to give an answer to the questions that you'll be raising through the panel. Well, just to summarize what we'll be discussing during today's panel, we just will have an overview of the previous and the actual YEKDEM mechanism. And then at the same time, the effect of pandemics on wind power plant investments, the environment for the climate for investment, and then at the same time, finance opportunities and the current, again, situation about wind power today. And we'll have an overview of the future projections and at the same time the new business models, especially what our expectations from storages, hybrid in particular wind power plants and the solar power plants, and at the same time investment today and tomorrow. And in general, we'll be speaking about auctions, and we also will receive some suggestions and recommendations as well. As you all know, after hydroelectricity power plant, the highest installed capacity for renewables is the wind. And by the end of February 2021, 9,192 megawatts of wind power plant that we have operational. And as for the total installed capacity in operation, again, as of February 2021, it is up to 9.5%. Our ministry for 2019-23 strategic plan, we set some goals. And within the framework of these goals, for electricity installed capacity based on WPP by 2023 will be 12,000 megawatts. That's what we are planning in our strategic plan.
2020 yılı içerisinde
within the year 2020, looking at electricity generation for WPP, 25 billion kilowatt per hour. That is the realized actual number. And looking at data of 2018, looking at generation of electricity in Europe, fifth, and in the world, we ranked the 10th. And in particular, looking at the status quo with regards to the industry, I'll be making a brief summary. And then, so as to start discussing about the agenda, I will just give the floor to our very distinguished panelists. Because we just should use the time effectively. And as you can see, all the panelists on the screen. And I would like to introduce them one by one. So from Güriş Enerji, Ali Karaduman will be taking the first floor. First of all, welcome. Thank you. Would you please discuss the previous and the present YEKDEM mechanism, and especially the renewable energy support mechanism, and in particular, what do you think is the climate and the investment climate is impacting, how it is impacting your investments? Thank you very much, distinguished minister. I first actually have 58 seconds of a video showing the installation of the wind power plant.
Sizlerle burada beraber
I'm just proud to be here with you. I would like to express my gratitude to all the participants on my behalf and on behalf of my company. Actually, our main theme in here is about the past and the future of the wind. Distinguished minister actually at the same time gave me a task, and I will not intervene into the topics of the other panelists. So I just would like to provide a brief outlook. I am the energy CEO of Görüş Holding, Ali Karaduman, mechanical engineer with a postgraduate. And in 1982, I actually joined Görüş, and I've been working since then at Görüş. Of course, Görüş Holding, as you all know, is the leading energy corporate in Turkey, and always will continue with the investments. And a 64-year-old company founded in 1958, and starting with 1993, especially we started and continued with our investments on renewables. And at the same time, Görüş Holding is one of the major investors in renewables. And actually, we have always been a pioneer in the industry. And we just completed the 64th year of the company, but unfortunately, something saddening happened. And our founder of the company passed away 40 days ago. And actually, our mentor, our father, we actually missed Yaman Türk, so we are really very sorry for this. Hope he will rest in peace, and hope he will remain in heaven. And he actually gave us the flag, and we have just handed over the flag to us. So we'll work harder, and we'll continue to make Görüş company proud. The design of our power plants are made by our own engineers, Turkish engineers. And at the same time, we are introducing our country to the rest of the world as well. And for renewables and for clean energy, and we actually will continue to uninterruptedly contribute to our country. And within the framework of the COVID-19 measures, we just adopt to the new normal. And in 2020, at Kocatepe WPP, again commissioned. And at the same time, we in total 12 wind power plant that we have in total under generation, 588 megawatts. And 65 megawatts in abroad, the first in Turkey. And by 2020, as Görüş Holding for wind, we are just one of the leading companies that invested in wind, and I'm proud to say that. Especially, we have large-scale management systems in place, and it's really helped us a lot to take quick actions. And at the same time, in particular, we continue with our renewable energy. Mr. Minister, we had a great meeting last year when we were all together, and Erol Demiral at the same time, and our colleague Zeki together. We said during the YEKA process, we just cannot catch up with the wind power plant. So we would appreciate, for example, if our government provides us the support. So for the power plants that we fail to complete, you actually should provide us. And you gave us a grace period of 6 months, an extension. And then now we, without any problem, continue with our investments. What is specific and good about these meetings is that, especially investors just like us, we actually have the chance to discuss about our problems directly to our government, to the Ministry of Energy. And the Ministry of Energy is really taking very immediate response. And also for this meeting, I would like to say, as a result of a long work that I've been involved, I kind of would like to say, the future of the world is in clean energy. I mean, globally, especially wind energy industry, the more it develops, as you all know, the pricing policy would also be much more competitive. We'll continue to reduce the costs, especially affordable and clean technology. As you all know, wind power plant, it actually is actually a path for actually a green improvement and for everyone. Maybe in parentheses, I can say, as you all know, Erol, I never call my big brother, but I really respect Erol a lot. You know, at the blade factory, while manufacturing, when first introduced to the industry, I said, what is going to be the capacity actually? You're just building a blade factory. I had a question mark in my mind, and I found out how visionary Erol is actually, because he actually made the startup. And we also started to pay attention to WPPs. It was in 1997 that we started for the first, and we continue with our investments. So Erol, our actually older brother, I would say, you gave us actually that support, and we at the same time in the power plant that we introduced first. So especially wind, I would say, hydroelectricity power plant and so on, the Turkish engineers, the Turkish Republic, we're all taking step, and you're giving us tasks, companies as such. So my kind request from you, Mr. Minister, is I think it's something so important. Even if we do investment, and it is 600 megawatts worth of an investment, same for the other companies. So we are just having a great competition, whether you are the first or I am the first, and so. But what is important is, as you all know, Turkish engineers are our national and local assets. So we have to use them to find solutions to our local problems. You also mentioned about, again, 9,200, 9,300 worth of a portfolio that we have. But of course, I think Mr. Yaman gave us the task to improve the Turkish engineers. So we maximize the localization rate. For wind power plant anchorage, for the towers, for the blade and the generator, they're manufactured locally. But as you all know, especially software, I mean, especially we have to be a part of the software development as well at the nacelle, because the turbines are of foreign origin in Turkey. But I think it is now the time to have local origin. And in wind, we would like to do, we have already done this geothermal. So as a Turkish engineer, me, myself, my company, and I'm sure the other panelists hopefully would agree with me, but in Turkey, also time to build wind turbines. We're up to 10,000 megawatt, but we're dependent abroad. So, and several, for example, supplies or engineers are coming from abroad. And looking at the lifetime of the wind turbines, it is maximum, for example, 25 years or so. But it is 49 years for the licensing duration. So it means that for the second time after these wind turbines are over, then we have to supply the second batch of the wind turbines. If you're asking me, Turkish government should be a part of this. Especially we have to improve the new local turbines, in particular the engineering is so important. It will provide so much support. I think this has been actually considered in some of the auctions, but as you all know, in the others, one turbine, for example, will be manufactured in Turkey and the project will be completed. But again, engineering will go back abroad. What is important is to improve the Turkish engineers here. And I think that is the most important thing I would like to convey as a message in this panel. So in renewables, another important thing is that this year, $5 billion worth of energy import avoided thanks to our investments in renewables, the countrywide investments. And today, the electricity generation over renewables, 120 billion kilowatts. So as Gürüş, we in this outlook in the industry, what we are saying is 2020, 2021, under all positive and negative conditions, we would like to say, if there is actually demand, there always is a solution. If you're not a part of a solution, it means that you're a part of the problem. That is the tradition of Gürüş. So as a private industry, I would like to say, we actually have a demand and saying that let's come together and let's work hard on it and have our own wind turbines. Let's overcome the problems and let's make it local, just like, for example, China is doing it and selling abroad. This very same thing is possible for us. And again, to Egypt, to Saudi Arabia, and we actually can possibly export our wind turbines, just like the defense industry, as you all know. Aselsan, TAI, they are, for example, exporting their own products. It also would be the same thing. So we'll be introducing the Turkish assets abroad. So wind power plants, as you all know, it's actually easy to erection, installation, and so on. But the things that we have to overcome in particular is the licensing period, and at the same time, environmental impact assessment in particular, the development plans. And to the extent possible, as Gürüş, what we pay attention to is actually to have very few deforestation or even minimum or zero, especially in the forest lands that cannot be used as the agricultural land. For 200 megawatts, for example, at Dinar, and at Sandıklı, another 100 megawatts of the WPP that we commissioned, 300 megawatts in Anatolia. So we are the first in Turkey. And trust me, we actually did not cut down even one tree. And the wildlife is at maximum now at these areas. And 750,000, again, forestation at the same time. We succeed in doing so. Wind energy is the national energy, and we actually have to own this. So as for my presentation, what we actually have to do in the actual power plants that we have, especially the difference between megawatt M and megawatt E, how we can support the market prices, repowering, hybrid power plants, storage issues. As for the power plants under the project phase, especially the license and the effect of the pandemics, and in the power plants, again, with the license but not constructed yet, GECDEM mechanism. And I would like to also discuss about the distribution companies' capacities. Would you please sum up, because not much time left, so please be quick. Of course. Now, for the power plants that are operational, the mechanical and electrical difference, the mechanical, there are several power plants with more mechanical power than electrical power. And this is the reason why we cannot actually use a national product. So it is important for the Turkish electricity distribution company to increase its capacity. And at the same time, in the power plants that cannot be completed but having a license or a pre-license, maybe we can at the same time give them a certain level of capacity. And at the same time, it's possible to set a price appropriate to the capacity. And therefore, in the investments that we make, it will be an additional value for the Turkish economy as well. As for the market prices, I think the biggest challenge that we have, Mr. Minister, is that once it is the market trade prices, once it is zero, the financiers or the companies actually we cannot make in defense from the market, again, the PTP between 12 and 16 hours, for example, there's a reduction in the prices, then we're at the level of selling it at 0 Turkish lira. So we make a major investment, and for the turbines we spend but we actually, as you all know, should return the investment between 12 to 16 hours. As you all know, selling it over 0 Turkish liras is actually not something good for the trade. Therefore, in the upcoming process, especially with regards to repowering, maybe our second phase turbines are once constructed, then for the license process, locations of the turbine, disposal of the decommissioned turbines, project processes and approvals, and at the same time there will be some capacity change requests of the investors. As you all know, I think Erol's power plant will be a part of this, but after 20-25 years, which is after for the turbines that will be commissioned after 2025. For example, the power plants on the bird migration routes, for example, maybe we cannot erect another power plant, but we should work on it. And my deceased told me that, what are you going to do after 49 years, after the license period is over? You will just decommission them, that you will, for example, erect them elsewhere or get some extension period from the government. He was a visionary. And we mentioned this to the Energy Market Authority, and they're just working on changing the regulation. For hybrid power plants and storage, I think Enis will provide more information. So for the hybrid power plants, as you all know, it has a good legislation, and especially once approval is received from TİAŞ, the distribution company, at again Kocatepe list, then we are planning to construct hybrid power plants. Therefore, as for the licensing processes, as you all know, especially to get a permit for forests and the development plan and the environmental impact assessment lawsuits, it takes a lot of time. We succeeded in doing it 24 months before, but now in 46 months, for example, not even adequate. And even if we complete them in 46 months, it makes us happy. So we were just taking the permits within 24 months initially, but as you all know, we couldn't do it right now, and it's loss of money. And at the same time, the country cannot actually benefit from renewables. As for the effect of the pandemics, I've already mentioned about this. As you all know, in our power plants and in the market, several measures are taken. And at the same time, we 100% abide by the instructions of the state. And therefore, there is no loosening in our investments as a result of the pandemics. We continue with the high pace, but of course, the new YEKDEM mechanism, at the same time, there is a 40% of an income loss with the YEKDEM mechanism change. So we're just pressing the brake pedal. Because during the pandemic, it's very difficult to find finance, and at the YEKDEM mechanism, the prices are low, so it almost impedes us to make any new investment. With regards, again, I think the renewable energy resource site legislation, my other panelists will mention about this, so I will skip these slides. But as I told you, in Turkey, if we are just going to make an investment in Turkey, we also need the support of the state. 40% of an income loss or reduction in loss, and at the same time we have the volatility in the exchange rate, foreign exchange rate, and the investments are over foreign currency. And at the same time, the IRR risks, these all reduce and decrease our investment. As you all know, there will be more energy demand after the pandemic. So thank you very much.
Well, Ali Bey, thank you very much for your contribution and the overview that you have given us in your talk. Now from Demirer Holding, Mr. Erol Demirer will be taking the floor. Welcome, sir, to our session. Mr. Demirer will be providing us with an overview about the investment environment in wind energy sector. What do you think about the new YEKDEM mechanism? And what do you think in particular about the financial opportunities there in the new mechanism? The floor is yours. Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished stakeholders in the wind energy, I'd like to express my appreciation to all of you. Actually, we're all the same in the sector, and I have to say that I totally agree with the views of the panel. I will provide you a perspective from financing. It was back in 1998 that we installed the first power plant in Çeşme, so it makes 28 years now. Wind was a new energy source back in those days, so it was not possible to find the proper financial instruments. And we also installed the first facility as auto producer, thanks to the financial support of our plant in Birecik. And the energy that was generated in Çeşme was set off from the consumption in Birecik. For the distribution and electricity share from the generation, 6.25 and 6.25 in the consumption, a total of 12.5 was cut off, and the rest was written in our books. And in the years to follow, this was halved to support the renewable energy. In a total of 625 cuts, we could sell our energy. And by the way, we are making much more cuts today, and generation and distribution costs are a lot higher. Now the consumers are paying like the double of our startup price in the power plant. So in time, it was increased. Now, this is how we installed the first power plant. And the second one is a build, operate and transfer plant in Bozcaada, the photograph of which you can see on my background. And we operated for 20 years, transferred at the end of the 20th year, but we won actually the auction for operating. And now we're operating the plant for AYAŞ. After these two plants, as the legislation changed, the financial aspects became a problem. Back in those days, electricity prices were quite high, and the plants were feasible, but it was not easy to find financial opportunities. So it had to be a long-term finance need. According to the YEK law, that the Renewable Energy Resources Law, that was published, that was announced in 2005. There was a change in TL base. There was a purchasing guarantee. We couldn't find proper finances. So why would that happen? Because the nature of the wind investment is different compared to a natural gas power plant, for instance. The life cycle expenses in natural gas is 50% investment, 30% gas, and the rest is operating. In wind, 30% investment and 10% is operational. So we need to make 3 times higher an investment. So when this is the case, the low interest and long-term credit becomes much more important. It was not that possible to borrow in TL because of inflation. Inflation, when it goes to 70%, when the first year ends, you will have to pay for the interest 10%, and then remains 90 lira. But in a year or so, the value of 90 lira is not the same. So the half you would not be paying even if you borrow. So long-term TL-based loan was not practically possible. Under the current conditions, the inflation is lower but still high. Therefore, the long-term TL-based loan would have a high interest rate, and in the first year you will have to pay for the 1/4 as a repayment. Therefore, the loans should be on foreign currency. Even if, like the prices of the machinery is on a foreign currency basis, even if it were in TL, a long-term loan is required for our purposes. Therefore, the loan should at all conditions be based on foreign currency. And when you are borrowing with foreign currency, financiers, the bankers, would ask for revenues on foreign currency. Otherwise, it would be considered as quite high. We had a lot of trouble for the first 2 years after 2005. After the YEKDAM prices were indexed to foreign currency, investments accelerated. And starting with 20 megawatts, now we're up to 10,000 megawatts today. We were multiplying back in those days when it was 10,000 megawatts annually. $5 billion worth of a natural gas saving will take place. So now we're realizing the figures. They became true. But in the new YEKDAM, the prices are low. On one side, everybody is just calculating the feasibilities, but next to it, on a TL basis, half is indexed to foreign currency, half to inflation. As a matter of fact, in the long run, inflation should be in parallel to the foreign currency increases. But as we can see recently, there are a lot of fluctuations in foreign currency rates, which bring along probably major challenges in repayment. So it's another risk factor on our shoulders. Actually, it has already been a competitive market because of the competitive prices. We're not in a position of meeting the risk margin. So if you ask me, in the financing of the new power plants, I would find a lot of problems financially. In addition to that, as Mr. Ali also emphasized, in the wind turbines, we need to localize the wind turbines so as to save our foreign currency. But for local production, we need a local market. Now, 3% of what you're producing is, to be consumed in Turkey, and the rest to be exported doesn't make sense. So we need a fixed market to make the investments make sense. According to the new YEKDEM, the investments will be a challenge. Hopefully, God will help us all. Thank you very much, and wish for the best for everyone. Thank you very much for your attention.
Now we'll move to Borusan, and Enis Amasyalı will be taking the floor. Welcome, first of all, Enis Amasyalı. Now, would you please analyze the present situation in Turkey for the wind energy, and especially would you please touch upon your future projections and also touch upon the new business models? We'll be more than happy to listen to you. Thank you. Distinguished Minister, dear participants, I actually would like to express my gratitude to all of you.
And I will start sharing my screen right away. Now, this is the outline of my presentation. Please just take note of it. The current situation, potential. If we consider the process up until now as the growth phase, I will also provide you the outcomes, the outputs of this growth. And then I will be providing you some brief information about the new business models. Before we move on to this part, I will make a brief introduction about my company, Borusan EnBW. Currently, we have 12 renewable energy facilities, 703 megawatts of installed capacity we have in total. And for the wind, it's 644 megawatts of wind installed capacity in total. So we have 9 wind turbines. But of course, this is the picture of the day because the things might be changing overnight in the sector. So the investments of big companies still continue with a big pace, which will be the same for our company as well. As for the current situation and the potential, Mr. Minister, as you have well explained at the outset, I will not be repeating the existing data, but there is one thing that I'd like to highlight. In installed capacity, particularly within the last 12 years, from 2008 up until now, from 360 kilowatts to 9.2 gigawatts we've reached. So in total, we can speak about a 31% of an annual growth ratio in the sector. And I recall about 10, 12 years ago, I was attending different conferences, congresses, and as the representatives of the wind power, we were the smallest player. People used to sympathize us, but we're not given so much right to say. So I think we've done our best in overcoming our childhood period, and now we have been in a power to strengthen our position even further. So this is the installed capacity. On the other hand, in the energy basket, there is about 10%, and in generation, it's up to 8%. Regarding the potential, now in similar platforms, we may look a bit behind the players, but 48 gigawatts, we said, with an altitude of 50 meters. And for an annual wind speed, this potential is calculated. Therefore, turbine technology is evolving in the meanwhile. So 7 meter per second, if it's taken down to 6.5, then we can all come up to 332 gigawatts, which is still a big value. But we know that there is still a long way to go in using the entire potential. In this entire growth phase, our contribution to reducing the current deficit has been our biggest contribution. On the other hand, in setting the prices, in reducing the spot prices and merit orders, our contribution. Also in terms of reducing carbon dioxide emissions, we have a big contribution. So turning back and looking into the picture again, these are the biggest headlines that will come to my mind as the biggest achievements in the last 10 years. As the installed capacity is growing, which can also be manifesting itself in other similar sectors, another graph that would accompany this is to show the evolution of technology with increasing efficiency. The decline in costs also will need to be depicted. The graph on the right side provides a global analysis, but probably is to give you some idea about the evolution. In 2007, in 2009, $135 per megawatt hour of electricity cost is down to $40-54 range today. Now, the composition may change, of course, from time to time. As you know, the turbine prices have come to a saturation, but this is the general trend. So there is a big decline that everybody would notice. And I would like to continue with the analysis of growth here after having shared these figures with you.
Rüzgar türbinine
As an analogy to the word wind turbine, of course, wind is our main resource, but of course, there will be the incentive mechanisms to be involved. YEKDEM, the renewable energy support mechanism. Not only that, but there have been many incentives provided all across the way, but the financing opportunities have been the biggest momentum of this growth. So we can speak about three main pillars, of course, next to many things, but these three pillars will need to be emphasized here. The first thing is the legislation. Legislation would define the rhythm or the speed of business in regulated markets such as ours. So within the process, there were times that, and this is more or less the time that we're discussing still, forest permits that has always been the biggest headline, or the technical interaction analysis that used to take very long, expropriation, the authority that was lately given to the National Real Estate Authority. Now it's going to be working faster, or the system utilization costs still in vague sometimes. Some, discussions used to take place, many headlines there, but in a nutshell, just turning back and making a brief evaluation what has happened, especially in other regulated, mature or developed markets, comparing ours with them, as well put by Mr. Erol, the very long destination that has been taken from the point of nowhere to the current status. About the legislation, of course, the sector counterparts and all of us to have a good rhythm. Yes, we were complaining about many things, mainly the delays just made us live through bitter times, but we can say that the mutual way of discussing around the problems really provided the very good solution to the problems that we had. And we know the paces and the complexity of the situation in Europe, thanks to our partner. And I can say that we have a good rhythm, speaking for a brand new sector. On the left side, you can see social and environmental impacts. And environment, of course, is the essence of what we are doing, of course, the social fauna. And as a sector, particularly as the main output of this growth period, I have to say that in a nutshell, good neighborhood has been our main principle of action. Good neighborhood means good neighborhood with the flora, with the fauna, with the local stakeholders. people, which I have to say that at the first point that we started, we had just a few turbines. We're far
sayımız
away,
arttı.
we're not visible. Now we have more number of turbines. Things have become more visible, so the sensitivities and in particular, information gaps will need to be filled in by the sectoral counterparts,
Bu
I have to
boşlukları
say. Which is really important because this may pave the way for this information. People used to think that when the turbines are to be installed, the bees would go extinct, so on and so forth. So altogether, we have to be proactive, equipping our people with correct piece of information. Continuing, of course, our effective
değildi.
communication with stakeholders. As emphasized by Mr. Karaduman, we have now become operable with different professions, veterinarian, biologist, ornithologist, which we never used to know. I mean, now we're in very good collaboration, and not only in installation, but also throughout the life cycle of our facilities. So we're working in collaboration with these.
Tüm bu
I have to say
çıkarımlar
that social and environmental impacts heading
olduğumuz
will
ki
need to be dwelled on more in the future.
iklim
Now we're also including the climate change in it. How far away is actually not that far away. We've seen that in the pandemic's time. And for the climate change, we now can see that we should be more aware of it because it's one-to-one and linked with our operational
yerli
practice. Another thing is about local content. Now, installation and operation capabilities,
idari
including
süreç
the local content. You can put in administrative processes, engineering, commissioning, maintenance, repair, all these capabilities, including local production, makes a big ecosystem since a broad employment is provided. So there is also big know-how accumulated. And I'm sure that in the future, this will yield fruits in terms of the local content being more a part of it. Therefore, I need to say that protection of this ecosystem is going to be quite critical in a
başlık oldu.
sustainability of this growth pattern.
Son kısmına geçmek
I'd
istiyorum.
like to change gears a bit and move to the last part of my presentation. Just a bit, I'd like to speak about new mechanisms or new business models. Of course, YEKDEM and YEKA auctions. But before that, of course, in years, the main expectation of the sector has been foreseeability, predictability. As you have well said, strategic plans and targets, or the targets in the letters of intent always emphasized. Mr. Minister also emphasized the fact of commissioning 1,000 megawatts of wind power capacity annually. It is really key to abide by these targets as well, because we're making our plans according to these estimations. Under this chapter, maybe sustainability will be another, part of the chapter. I have to say that, especially recently on the YEKA side, the main trend has been, and which I have to say must be correct, high capacity factor projects may only be competitive in these new
Soru
mechanisms,
işareti
which I have to say is the right thing. But according to the
diğer
first, impressions that we are getting, the question marks are about the financial models. We are talking to the banks and other stakeholders about these aspects, as well explained TL price base and escalation also involves partial risks. How this is going to be interpreted by financiers. The first impression is that the financing costs will increase, and also the equity ratio is roughly 23%, but the general analysis is that it will be raising by 20-30%. Therefore, the financial institutions, how they will be interpreting the mechanism,
mekanizmalar
will again be the basis of the discussion. Therefore, I have to say that it is really critical how the way will be paved. But probably before the deadline, before the end of June at least, we need to put it on the table where people will be able to discuss and clarify their perspective. And we are thankful for the mechanisms because it was really critical in terms of predictability. And now, as all the stakeholders probably will have answers to give. Another
geldiğimizde
important thing is, as we come to the auction conditions, pricing mechanism is really important, not only for reducing the prices, but in the past, we've also recommended some mechanisms as other
orada hala
organizations, like going down to a base price. And when there is still competition going on there, in a
megawatt
very
bazlı
short period of time, megawatt-based, a contribution share can be paid, so that all the mechanisms can
finans
act more in a more rational way. Now, in terms of financing, we can also make sure sustainability, or depending on the size of the auctions, maybe of the collateral guarantees can be all more dissuasive, technical competencies. I mean, these kind of conditions will need to be the basis for defining the auction conditions. I'm sure that these all will have a big contribution to the future projects. To continue with the new business models in the medium to long term, some corporates green energy supply agreements, the green tariff, namely, as this can be considered as the green energy supply agreements. Now, the graph on the bottom side, you can see America, Europe, Asia Pacific, about the volume of these green energy
noktaya
supply agreements. You can see the evolution now. And all over the world, we see prices getting to
daha
decline,
zayıf
and the incentive mechanisms are getting to weaken. There we would need different financial mechanisms. Of course, the macroeconomic data or the market dynamics of the relevant markets would also define the conditions of the new agreements, which, by the way, is triggered by the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. These are really quite critical in the financial working, functioning of the companies. Many international companies are becoming a part of this initiative. In this respect, we can speak about 100% supply of
edebiliyor.
renewable
Ülkenin
energies, so they may opt for
fiyat öngörüleri
longer term agreements, but price predictability has not yet reached that level in Turkey. So not in the short run, but rather in the medium to long run, this can be an important option for the consumers and also for the producers as us. Another item that may be on our agenda is, we see this particularly in North Europe, especially in the green energy supply agreements. That the public will undertake some risks and start the first move for the development of that particular market. Therefore, in Northern Europe, the public authorities undertake such agreements to set the role model for the sector. And the question is whether this can be a good model for our country. Maybe starting with short run, we can evolve it into maybe medium to long term scale. Other than that, hybrid facilities and storage technologies, of course, some legislation and drafts are being discussed. Actually, we are hopeful about these new business models for the wind and solar, of course, coupling it with
depolamayı da katıp
also the solar
iyi
and
santralleri
including storage to that as
girmek.
well.
Bu
So we can also convert it into partial load facilities. So when the analysis are conducted, the existing incentive model, I think, is quite critical, speaking for hybrid essentially. And on the other hand, maybe on the other side of the coin, we also, from the perspective of the net or the grid operators, if there is a conversion from the partial base way of working, it will bring a lot of value and interest. And hybrid And storage in our geography, as storage is becoming commercial, I think activation of these sites will give a brand new business model. So probably the other speakers will be speaking on it in more detail, and I will just wrap up quickly. And I will finish by touching on the new models on top of what I've been speaking: offshore wind power plants. Now, in 2020, on a global scale, has reached 35.6 gigawatts. And of course, having said that, in the medium to long term, as we have a very long way to go in the land potential, we also will need to consider offshore. The offshore technical capacity of Turkey is set as almost 70 gigawatts, which is a value not to be underestimated. So maybe as a precondition, the necessary measurements and the studies will need to be conducted so as to avoid the vagueness in offshore. Of course, that depends on the market dynamics of the medium and the long run. But to raise the appetite of the investors, I think will be a very good and attractive option for the investors. Digitalization, maintenance, and operation based on remote control and monitoring. I think wind power plants are quite suitable for remote monitorization and control. Artificial intelligence and data analysis, together with the introduction of the contemporary instruments, I think this is going to open a door for the new business models. Repowering, as Mr. Ali also emphasized, the average age of our fleet is 6 years. In wind energy, the functioning, the producing turbines are 6 years old in average,
vadede
quite young. But in some time, they will need to be partially or totally renewed. So before these years come, we need to set the legislation, and of course, the relevant mechanisms should be in place. This is extremely important. The years pass by quite quickly. 12 years have already gone by. So the success story in the last 12 years has been just in the blink of an eye. So probably this will need to be noted down. The last one is green hydrogen in the long run, of course. There was a time, like early 2000s, that we used to raise our voices high, both globally as well, for green hydrogen, and then it was suspended, and then it followed with our pandemics, and now we are speaking more of climate change. And Europe sees the hydrogen as a leverage for new development phases. There are some pilot studies conducted in Turkey. Here, of course, the green hydrogen is about the process of electrolysis with renewable energy. This is about production of hydrogen by using 100% renewables for electricity and water. And of course, this is a process that has high electrolysis losses, but after maybe the first crawling phase, after a threshold, we can commercialize potentially this huge industry. So this is not just going to be our side of the green hydrogen, but at the same time, natural gas. It has got some proximity to the natural gas. It may be mixed with natural gas to up to 10-15%. Transport and also industry. It can also be using hydrogen in the long run. So we have to wait and see how it's going to evolve, although we are in the conceptual phase for the moment. So we need to be in close follow-up of what is going on there as well. Okay, concluding my remarks, I have to say that above all, in renewables, of course, as the stakeholders, particularly as those struggling for wind energy, I believe from the bottom of my heart that we are in the correct sector. The journey of energy is quite a long one. As in all journeys, there are ups and downs, but essentially we need to look at the positives, which is positive. Of course, I've said it, the other participants also uttered some concerns and question marks, but altogether, I believe that with all of our contributions, we can answer those question marks. And above all, we're doing something that will be useful for our country, for ourselves, for our children. And therefore, this useful business, I'm sure, will deserve the best support and no room for pessimism. Thank you.
We thank you actually for your contribution. Now from Exim Investment Holding, I'd like to give the floor to Sabahattin Er from Exim Investment Holding. As you all know, Sabahattin, Mr. Er, it is not only in the wind energy, it is actually the same for the others, especially there's some expectations with regards to storage capabilities. As you all know, Energy Market Regulatory Board already had some preparations with regards to storage, and we have also received some expectations of the industry. Now they're in the position of discussing it, and of course this regulation will soon be sent to the official journal. What are your expectations from the storage capabilities? As you all know, we also have the regulation on the hybrid. But I think with regards to hybrid, actually, there's not much progression. Especially the Energy Market Regulatory Board is also assessing this. And for hybrid and wind power plants, what do you think should be done? What are your suggestions and expectations? And lastly, about in terms of the investment cost, especially when you compare the past and today. Would you please make an overview? The floor is yours. Thank you, distinguished minister. As Exim Energy, we have 10 active power plants operational, and 2 of them, one being abroad, hydroelectricity power plant, and at the same time, at different parts of our country, we have 8 wind power plants that we generate electricity. Now, in the investment process, looking at the experiences that we gained, I think I'll be underlying 2 concepts, and I will just try to make an overview. I think heart to heart, because Enis also said the same thing, it's all about predictability and sustainability. As you all know, for the energy markets to deepen, maybe the biggest obstacle that we have is not being predictable, I would say. The players in the electricity market should consider their costs, the tariff and the regulation changes that they will be subject to. And the consequences, negative consequences that the risks will bear, and managing the risks, we have to know all about this to have a healthier industry. Of course, eventually it will be reflected to the final user. And in this investment process, once there's actually no predictability, think about, for example, once you would like to have a wind power plant for 30 months pre-license and 30 months of the construction license given, for example, by the Energy Market Regulatory Authority. And therefore, the construction and everything should be completed in a very short span of time, just like 5 months, for example. And especially in pre-license process, we have so many uncertainties. What I mean is there are the ongoing changes in the regulation legislation. At the same time, with regards to land acquisition, there are differences. Or, for example, the very same authority actually has different practices at different parts of the country. So it can go up to 30 months or 48 months. So this process can get longer. And of course, as you would appreciate, this is quite challenging financially for the investors. And it is, in particular, the license that you're saying, you mean the modifications to the licensing regulation causes trouble. What do you mean by that? Of course, I don't want to be unfair. I mean, With regards to many licenses, of course, several positive things happen, but still for land acquisition license, for example, or while getting certain licenses, especially maybe as a result of the pandemics, but as you would appreciate, there are actually quite long periods, quite extended periods for the investors. And of course, it caused a lot of trouble in the investment plan, in the financial plan. You have to postpone and so. And eventually, of course, our country at the same time cannot benefit from the electricity generation that will end up as a result of these investments. As for the sustainability side, I have two comments on this. The first thing is the sustainability of the investments, and the second is the sustainability of the power plants that are already operational. As you mentioned also in your presentation, also we know it from the association's January report, 9,300 megawatt active power plants and 1,700 megawatts under construction. Once they're completed, 11,000 megawatts, which is quite a good number that we will reach. And looking retrospectively in 2007, it was almost none, this capacity. In 13, 14 years, a great pace that we catch up with, great numbers. And looking, when compared to the EU countries, I can say we're just doing it much better, more successful and faster than many EU countries. And we have just reached some such capacities. Of course, in doing so, the industry also developed nationally. 7 tower companies, 3 blade factories that we have. As for the generators, they are being produced in Turkey. At the same time, there are several manufacturers that are dealing with the connecting devices. So we actually have a great synergy. And looking at the neighbor countries in the region, in parallel to the global trend, all countries are just trying to utilize and maximize their capability for renewables, and in particular wind. And I think, how do they do this? First of all, they actually force the manufacturers to do local production in their own country, so they can have a more stable and larger production in the country. And with the incentive of the ministry, at the same time, I can say we've just reached to a manufacturing level that we desire, and hopefully everything would be much better in the future. But the thing I would like to underline is that as for the after projects under construction are completed for next year, I mean, starting with 2022, probably the project stock inventory will go down. We have 2 YEKA projects, each 1,000 megawatts. And if I'm not mistaken, in 2017, in December, at 3,000 megawatt worth of an auction that we had. So this 3,000 megawatt auction, majority of it, I think 2,500 megawatts, again, already awarded. And as the investor, I think we also have to make a self-critic. Of course, while complaining about some of the regulations, of course, in the 3,000 megawatt of the auction, we as the investors, knowingly, we jumped into unpredictability. And in these old price projects, unfortunately, very few of those will be commissioned, and probably the others will be deployed in the upcoming years. But of course, for this investment pace in wind power plants will be lost. No, we have an alternative. By the Energy Market Regulatory Authority, as you all know, there are some additional capacities assigned for already existing power plants. But with regards to these additional capacities,
sektörde talep var.
There is such a request. There is actually the condition, a prerequisite to use the localization rate for the additional capacity. So, and according to the legislation, no subsidy is given for that. But that's the reason why they are actually forced maybe to, I can say, get some import equipment. But of course, calculating the cost of such additional capacity, I think it will be a must for the investor to supply internationally. So I guess especially there must be the localization incentive for the additional capacity. That's what we expect. And in the previous YEKDEM period, especially 52% of the local rate was paid to the investor, but in after June 2021 and the new YEKDEM and this table of the local rate, it actually reduced down to 35%. So the investor will get only 35%. So I guess especially for our national industry or for the, it means, you know, thousands of people are employed,
İmalatında çalışan
especially thinking about the employment, working in the towers, turbines, and connecting equipment. So it will be lost. And I think it's an important point to underline.
Şimdi bu
Now,
yatırımların devamı için ilave kapasite 1000 megawatttan
this 1,000 megawatts of additional capacity, we have to discuss, and the 3,000 megawatts award.
değer bir ilerleme.
But probably there probably will not be a significant progress there. But our new auction planning should be introduced immediately. Last week, the Turkish Energy Distribution Corporation actually announced a capacity that was so exciting. So 19,000 megawatts for the first 5 years and 4,000 megawatts of a capacity for the upcoming 4 years for all resources. Yes, for all resources. And probably, I think half of the share will be for wind. That's what we expect, Mr. Minister. And it's 10 years from here. And then you also have a promise from the previous years that 1,000 megawatts of wind installation each year. So 1,000 megawatts for 10 years. So we're expecting your planning for the future, which will help the investors to be much more predictable. And at the same time, this good climate of investment for wind will continue. So 5 plus 5 years of a wind power plant planning that we all expect as the investors from your side. Another perspective is that our power plants, operational power plants, okay, we plan for new investments, of course, but we have actually huge installed capacity. After YEKDEM prices are over, and of course, these power plants will sell over the market prices. And at the end of these 10 years, at the same time, there will be no exemption for forest use permit. And we're actually so happy from the past price increases, but as you all know, we have now 35–40% of increases, which never predicted for. So at the end of the 10 years, the increases in the production and no more permit exemption for the forests. And at the same time, there will be contribution pay for so many power plants in the future. So these are some of the challenges that we will have in the future for sustaining the power plant. So I hope that our ministry hopefully will consider these at the post-YEKDEM period. I think there is actually the need to revise them. That's what we demand as the industry. But of course, if you're asking us what you plan as the investor, in July, the hybrid regulation introduced. So for the wind areas, if at the same time, for example, if solar again allowed there, then we probably will have more effective generation. I think Probably the storage issue, the storage solutions in the medium run. Storage solutions have a high cost still. I don't know, maybe electricity that is down to 0 cents for example, night can be stored and then introduced to the system in the morning. As Enis mentioned, the green hydrogen and all, again, during the times that the electricity price is actually down to 0, maybe it can be turned into green hydrogen, and this green hydrogen can be used in transportation, in heating, and at the same time at different industries.
Bilemiyorum, süremizi
I
açtık.
think my time is up. Yes, I just don't want to interrupt you. I just tried to make an overview that's very quick. So it is all predictability and sustainability, my key points.
Peki, teşekkür ederiz Sabahattin Bey.
Thank you
Değerlendirmeleriniz için.
for your overview.
Son olarak da
Now,
Sayın
last but not least, Mr. Zeki Eriş will be taking the floor as the last speaker of the session.
Bey, siz de hoş
Zeki
geldiniz.
Bey, welcome to our session.
Sizden de biliyorsunuz,
And we will kindly ask you to consider
kapasite yarışmaları
capacity auctions
bu kapasite yarışmalarıyla ilgili
that have been going on for many years. And what do you think about these capacity auctions? And at the same time, what do you feel, how you feel about the future of these auctions? What do you think, how they will need to be conducted in the years to come? What do you think? If you have any recommendations about it, we'd like to hear them. What do you think were the missing points in the auctions in the previous years? And how do you think the setting of the auction should be to have the better contribution to the sector? The floor is yours. Mr. Minister, firstly, I'd like to thank you. Of course, you have an inevitable leadership in the sector. And from the very first day of your assignment, you've paved new horizons, of course, that really contributed to the achievements of the sector. And I'm sure that you have been one of the players, key players, for the success of the industry, and would like to express my gratitude to you, sir, for this contribution. And recently, the Wind Energy Association, TÜREB, has changed the story, maybe upgraded the story to a different level. And we, as the stakeholders of the industry, are pleased to see this, the contribution of the new management of the association. Would like to congratulate them for this contribution. Now, Mr. Minister, we are now discussing in a very elite group of participants, and looking around the screen, I can see that maybe 1/3, maybe even more than the wind investors of Turkey are represented on the screen as 5 major companies, which I think is really a very important indicator. What we are talking about here is essentially based on administrative, financial, engineering, constructive experience. So the representation pattern also is a very good evidence of this know-how. My big brothers, I have to say, Mr. Demirer, as in particular, emphasized really important aspects of the debate. And Mr. Amasyalı really made a very visionary presentation. Also with the contribution of Mr. Er, discussing about the current problems we are going through, and also with the financial problems, and the same is true for Mr. Karaduman, having emphasized with really very target points, pointing out to our problems. They have not left many to discuss for my side. And yet I will try an approach from a macro perspective. This may sound a bit critical. But in Europe, maybe in America, considering some success stories in different parts of the world, particularly those geographies that have led our industry, intermingling it with my experience, and I will try and just question whether it would have been better if we did things the other way around. Now, yes, auctions. We are, in the world every day, different auctions and competitions are taking place. Auction, in particular, in our sector, in our capacity, would need to be discussed first from the perspective of having the correct players that should be there. Like, for instance, as an analogy, if you were to put me in a race against Usain Bolt, I mean, doesn't matter how much people would be supporting me, just try once. You may win over him. Yes, I would try. I would never give up. You can rest assured for that. We'll try. We'll give it a try. But how much the audience would be pleased of the outcomes? How many times would they come back to watch this race? And maybe after the third or the fourth one, would Usain Bolt again accept to race against me? These are the questions that we should be raising. The investors, of course, will need to have an expectation of revenues. No need to reinvent the wheel. If you are to develop a power plant and we need to work on a given price mechanism for this power plant, either on Turkish lira, US dollars, Bitcoin, doesn't matter on which sense, but at the end of the day, having a predictable price mechanism will need to be considered from the eye of the bank as to how predictable it should be. And then the bank will come up and say, I can issue a loan up to 10-15% of this amount. And at the end, you will be, earning this much of money. And at the end of the day, investors or the racers will come and decide. Ali wants to make 12%, but I would agree. I would be okay with 10. Someone would say, okay, I would be okay with 8. Someone would say, doesn't matter. It's just 3% would be fine with me. And at the end of the day, the people who are really competent enough to do it will be invited by you, the authority, and you will make an appraisal of us, and the authority will guarantee to purchase from a given price. But what do? If we invite, unequal partners or the unequal parties to this auction, if we are to invite, the people who have no access to 30 or 40 million US dollars, which would essentially be needed for this kind of an investment. And we agree to apply, very small amount of fines. Fines is not applicable anymore. By the way, there is no big, letter of guarantee to support it. So we would just dwell on this for 5 or more years. Then what will happen? An energy that is not been able to be generated. By the way, it's really a big success of the Ministry of Energy. We've lowered the level that used to be 60% down to 30%, which I have to say that it's going to mean foreign currency arriving. Plus, the people who can make this investment will be in the position of locating their equities from their known business to maybe to unknown business, eventually investing abroad, maybe somewhere else. So probably will be losing it. At the end of the day, the capital of the country will be missed somehow. But the fact that there is no single fine mechanism or the punishment mechanism would be a big mistake to me, if you ask me, because 3, 4, 5 years you can just set some dates. But if it's 5 years and 1 day, if the company is to produce 100 million megawatts, I will have to pay 15 million US dollars to buy it from abroad. okay, pay me and I will wait for you for 150 years, but you don't do anything. And at the end of the day, you will come back and say, it's the Ministry of Forestry that has been delaying my permits, and I have this problem in the environmental impact assessment report. They sued me, and these seem to be the excuses, maybe sometimes rightful excuses of the investors that they can hide behind. But if you cannot solve these problems for 5 years, they would come and ask you, although you know you wouldn't be able to resolve these problems, why would you submit an offer and raise an application? At the end of the day, we need people who are knowledgeable about the sector, who have proven themselves, and who have the sufficient amount of money that will be needed to be invested in the sector. If you invite these kind of investors in the auctions, I think we will be quite successful in achieving the electricity energy as a country, and we need your visionary leadership, in my opinion, in this respect, Mr. Minister. Plus, as we discussed before, I remember talking about the power plants that they could not be built and about the rationale why they were not built. And in your leadership, why in your leadership? Because you are familiar with the legislation of the energy markets and with your background on the energy competencies, both in terms of the forest, urban, or Ministry of Urban Affairs. You are in a very good shoulder contact. Therefore, with the investors in quite an objective and real goggle, I believe that you'll have the capacity of making a very good assessment of what is going on. Actually, things may have just an endless story, but there are, I know that there are licenses that were issued 11, 15 years ago, but the plants have not yet been installed. And I think that we need to stand up to say no to these. And finally, the capacities. We waited for many years after the auctions and nothing has changed. And of course, amongst the participants of the auction, if there is no control and follow mechanism, I'm afraid that the point that will be arriving in new auctions will be quite the same. I mean, just a couple of years of pre-license, just a couple of license periods and force majeure conditions to be extended, and now the thousands of capacity is now being suspended in the system. I know that since 2004, the licenses that tend to lock down capacities. At the same time, 9,000 megawatts of power plants, the connection, the access roads of which have been completed, all the permits furnished, operational, they're just functioning. Therefore, it should be okay for these capacity races. I mean, we should be okay with these capacity races, and we should be allocating some stuff to these capacities as well. I'm sure that this is going to increase the also the satisfaction of the investors, and at the same time will increase their motivation. I remember the first day that I visited one of them, the gigantic facility. It's just one E48 blade and an incredible imagination. But now I look back and see the same factory is now exporting equipment from Turkey to Canada. And there are people who have reached this level. About steel and metal, I visited a factory in Izmir, incredible lines, 3 or 5 megawatts of turbines, generators. They are producing and importing. You see, I mean, we waited for these capacity increases and these investments for 7, 8 years, and we will not be just bound with, these imports. And at the same time, we will be hampering this industry, all kinds of local raw materials and know-how. I'm afraid, will have to be lost and will not be able to have access to them as well. So maybe we need to stick the pin and just to think about the people who really have the power, access to finances, and just put them on business. And it's maybe right about time to have introduced them into the market. And just before consuming my time, I will be terminating my own speech and would like to thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Zeki Erish. Actually, we're about to consume our time, and there are some questions we've received, both in terms of these questions and probably within the framework of maybe the opinions of our distinguished panelists. We'll just discuss a bit and then we'll finish. In terms of the questions, the sector is in an expectation of providing and furnishing and increasing capacity, and also capacity tenders, auctions, or mini yakas. Would you plan to make this kind of auctions in the future for improving the capacity of the sector? And the efforts that were spent for the projects completed in February the 2nd, and what do you think about the future? Of course, a regular capacity supply is important in terms of predictability, as highlighted by all the panelists. As in Yaka Guest, for the wind power Yaka auctions, we're in the verge of these mini yakas, but we are also in consultation with the sector to run the process, and since we intend to do so, we also have updated, and we've just let the board of directors of TÜREB about it. There is a capacity supply that was announced previously, and for this capacity increase, of course, by preserving the sites, and there were many investors that made some measures. Actually, the limits, provided that the limits, the boundaries of the announced region will not be changed, we are planning to announce a mini yaka for 2,000 megawatts. Also, what the ceiling price should be, how the conditions of the auctions will need to be set, what the investors will be given in terms of a period, in terms of the time to submit their offers. We've asked for an opinion in main issues. We expect the opinion quite quickly. If we were to receive this opinion tomorrow, the other day, we can announce a tender. But what is important for us is that the wind investors are keen on submitting their opinion on the different aspects of the tender so that we'll have the correct way of doing things. As much as possible, we want to set the best for the conditions of the auction and will not be changing the condition as we start the auction. This is our aim, our target, but of course, if there is anything that you need to urge us to change in the specification to make it more competitive, more transparent, we sometimes may have to adjust the conditions. And let me just, by the way, announce it to the entire sectoral stakeholders. We expect the opinion of the board of directors of TÜREB. As we mature this opinion, a 2,000 megawatts of mini yaka wind energy turbine announcement will be made. About storage, there was a draft regulation that was mentioned by the panelists. It was prepared, and not only you, but all the investors at, in the industry were consulted with. Now we are just reviewing all these consultations. Probably soon, this regulation will be enacted. Therefore, all the procedures about the storage facilities will be probably pave the way. I mean, in terms of the investors who are willing and planning to invest in this area. Now, in the hybrids, what is particular about the wind turbines is the existing legislation is not sufficient in terms of setting the background for the land of investment. But with these opinions and with this other piece of legislation, we will have overcome these problems. And in this respect, in terms of capacity, there is no problem in terms of hybrid. There is no capacity limitation for these investments, and the applications to be made will be entirely based on the feasibility of the investors. About the applications made so far, for 23 wind turbines, a hybrid wind energy power plant of 1,300 megawatts was applied to. And about the fields where the land or the territory can be used, there will be a regulation, adjustment to be made for the opinion of the investors. Another thing is, just already said, 2,000 megawatts. The power plants that have not yet been built. The issue also that was discussed by Mr. Erish. I think we need to put it on the table and discuss why they couldn't have been built yet. I think this is going to be one of the biggest discussions. Anybody who would like to also contribute to this discussion would be welcome. The red lines about it is all investors must maintain their integrity, which means there should be no suggestion for solution that would change the conditions of the auction, because the participants who have failed to win the auction probably would come and ask us if this were the condition changes that could have been for our sake as well. It shouldn't be how to interpret the changes in the auction conditions, provided that there is no change in the conditions of the auction, providing that it would remain as the main principle. We can otherwise just adjust on the conditions of the auctions. But as rightfully expressed by Mr. Ash, there can be some problems in the setup of the auctions, but the participants may have some failure as well. And from time to time, about termination of licenses, of course, some regulations are made. Like similarly in 2020, a regulation was also made there. What does it mean? The licenses that will not be executed in time
ki bunlar sonlandırılsın ki
will be terminated, so that the resources will not wait in an idle way. So the real investors will be making the investors for them as well. 2,400 megawatts of negative priced licenses are there, as said. To be honest, I'm surprised once I received the termination demands in February, because out of it only 1,775 megawatts terminated. 1,188 megawatt of a negative priced wind power plant still is there on the table. And the investor is not yet terminating it. Probably they planned to finish their investment, I mean to complete the investment despite of the negative price. Almost half of it agree to continue with these prices. What needs to be done after this point is we need to find the licenses that are not executed based on reasonable force majeure conditions or rationales. I mean, we need to make it happen so that the resources will be held in the hands of correct investors who are really planning to make an investment. Therefore, in the process to follow, I'm sure that the Energy Planning Board will be in proper consideration of this condition. I mean, if it's to be executed, okay, otherwise will need to be terminated. Particularly speaking about solar and wind, we need capacity limitations, as everyone knows. So the resources will need to be utilized by correct investors, according to me. Okay, it seems that it's just been 5-6 minutes that we've gone beyond the time limit. Would like to thank everyone for their contribution. Hopefully, in the coming period, we will be together in different platforms and similar meetings, contributing, of course, to the solution of our common problems. And before closing, I'd like to make an announcement about the next panel. It will take place in May the 26th. We'll be discussing about the first YEKA experiences and how the capacity increase models will be enhanced. Okay, announcing from this day, please take note of it on your agendas. May the 26th will be the next day of our meeting. I would like to thank all of you for your contribution. And I also would like to thank the Turkish Wind Energy Association for this event. Hopefully, this has been useful for the entire sector. Have a nice day.